What's good, YouTube? We're talking college sports in the Deep South, where college football is king, and on the plains of Auburn, the battle cry is War Eagle. Once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart here for the podcast, talking a little bit about Auburn football. Let's go ahead and like this video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Really love your comments. Fearless and True Gang, get it really active. Also, have a lot of folks from other genres of college football, other conferences that come on here and make their comments as well, and they're, of course, welcome. And on this channel, is always great to be an Auburn Tiger, War Eagle. Now we're getting back to our Auburn opponent series, preview series, where we talk about the opponents that Auburn will face this year. We've already been through 8 games of the Auburn season. The last game we talked about was the LSU game, which we feel, depending on how the season, the outcome of the season up to that point, the LSU game could be a pivotal point for the Auburn Tigers headed into the last November stretch. Auburn will be taking on, right after the LSU game, will be taking on Ole Miss. Now, I'll go ahead and say this is not my most, favorite game to watch, in the SEC. And some of it is, usually the game doesn't have like really, really high implications as to the outcome of the SEC. I think the most consequential game was that showdown in 2014, very entertaining football game where Auburn actually won in very dramatic, almost tragic fashion. Laquan Treadwell for Ole Miss fumbling like right at if there was a point of the end zone, of the goal line that's like less than an inch line, he fumbled right there and then broke his leg as he crossed the plains, and they did the, instant replay. And just a really horrific way to lose on so many levels for Ole Miss in that particular game. But probably one of the more entertaining Auburn-Ole Miss games in recent history. So when we look at this particular game, Auburn leads the all-time series 32-11. So this game really, from a series standpoint, has never really been that close. I mean, you look at this series and there's so many strings of wins, like say for instance between 1998 and 2009, Ole Miss had only won 3 times. And, looking at currently, Auburn holds a 3-game winning streak over Ole Miss. And I don't see that changing this year as well. You look at, Ole Miss and head coach Matt Luke in his 3rd season as Ole Miss. He kind of took over a debacle down there at Ole Miss where they're, dealing with sanctions and things of that nature from the previous head coach, Hugh Freeze. And, they're trying to really piece some things together down there at Ole Miss. And he's doing the best he can. He has actually put together a nice offensive and defensive coordinator staff. Got Rich Rodriguez as his offensive coordinator, very experienced coordinator. Mike McKinley as his defensive coordinator. Want to bring that 3-4 type defense. Think that gives him a better chance to defend teams in the SEC. And I mean, it has to get better. Ole Miss allowing about 36 points per game on last season. One thing to note when we look into this Ole Miss team is really they're losing a wealth of talent, especially on the offensive side of the football field. You have freshman Matt Corral, who is actually a redshirt freshman, who will probably take over for Tamu, who was the quarterback last year. And they did an excellent job moving the football. They averaged 33 points per game. And these were the bright spots for Ole Miss on last season, as you have DK Metcalf, A.J. Brown, and LaMarcus Lodge, who are all now employed in the NFL, really did a great job moving the football. But the only issue with Ole Miss is they just honestly couldn't stop anybody. So when we look at the 2018 schedule for Ole Miss, just a plethora of inconsistencies for Ole Miss. You surveyed, they got off to a pretty good start, beating Texas Tech 47-27. And then the following week, against Alabama. I mean, just an absolute onslaught, 62-7 against Alabama. during that time of the season where Tua Tagovailoa was just sweeping through college football last year. And then, of course, the next couple of weeks later with the loss to LSU. So already in conference play early in the season, or starting out 0-2, but then went on a 2-game winning streak, beat University of Louisiana Monroe for homecoming, then beating Arkansas. Then Auburn comes to town, one of those 11 o'clock games that Auburn had. As a matter of fact, Ole Miss as well had the same kind of stretch where they had all 11 a.m. games, one against Auburn, South Carolina, Texas A&M, all SEC games, and none of those games turned out well. Looked like they almost had an opportunity to beat South Carolina in the middle of that stretch. When we look at the box score for the South Carolina game, South Carolina got up 17-3. Ole Miss actually scored 24 points in the second quarter, and that game was basically a shootout where South Carolina just outlasted Jordan Ta'amu and the Ole Miss Rebels to go ahead and win that particular football game. It's just going to be tough this year for Ole Miss. They're still recovering from the the sanctions left on them as far as probation goes. Now, one good thing about it is they did have a 22 ranked recruiting class that is, the top, few guys were guys that were junior college transfers, so they can come in and make an immediate impact for the Ole Miss Rebels. And another guy that I think could really make some immediate impact when we talk about the recruiting class for the Ole Miss Rebels, as they were ranked number 9 in the SEC recruiting wise with an average rating of 87.66. But the reason why their rating was so low is because you have to look at the bottom end of the recruiting. You're talking about a lot of 84s, a lot of 83s. So that kind of brought their recruiting rating down. But those are still some guys that could be developed. It could take a little bit longer. Typically, according to these numbers, it tends to take those guys a little bit longer. But, really cashing in on a good running back, Jerrion Ely, out of Jackson Prep in Flowood, Mississippi, a rating of .9870. He could come in and really make an immediate impact to help supplement getting Ole Miss back into some degree of relevancy in the SEC. By this time, of course, it will be the 9th game of the season for the Auburn Tigers. And by then, of course, just by default, all the cards will be on the table. All of the bulk of the SEC games that Auburn will have played up to that point, the majority of the ranked teams that they will play, they would have played Florida, would have played Mississippi State, is not ranked right now, but would have played Mississippi State, and of course would have played LSU and Texas A&M. So where Auburn will stand in the SEC going into November will be well in hand by the time they meet Ole Miss. This will actually be a home game in Auburn. It could be one of those 11 o'clock games depending on who else is playing that day. Not sure if Ole Miss is going to be able to really bring a lot of winning outcome to the table in this particular football game, because their schedule is really not favorable to even be bowl eligible this year for the Ole Miss Rebels. It could get pretty rough for the Rebels this year because, like I said before, this schedule is not at all favorable for the Ole Miss Rebels, because you start out against Memphis. Memphis wasn't a bad football team last year. Arkansas should win over Southeastern Louisiana, but actually have a home game against California, which I think will be pretty interesting. But then starting a stretch with Alabama, Vanderbilt, Missouri, Texas A&M, Auburn. I'm talking about between September 28th and November 2nd is going to be an absolute brutal stretch for Ole Miss. And I just don't see, based on this particular schedule, I'm looking at maybe a win against Memphis. Arkansas, that's going to be kind of a dogfight. They're both, rebuilding. Not too sure about California. So those are toss-ups. Alabama, no. Vanderbilt, maybe. So how they're going to be able to squeeze 6 wins out of this particular schedule, I just really don't see it for the Ole Miss Rebels. They're going to have a very, very young team, a very inexperienced team. As a matter of fact, they're in a similar situation like Auburn, where they have 4 freshman quarterbacks that they can choose from, and the most experienced one is redshirt freshman Matt Corral. So I just don't think this is a game that, no matter what Auburn's outcome is at this point, I don't think this is a game where Auburn should be severely challenged. I think this is a game that Auburn should win to get ready for their stretch in the SEC in November. Hopefully Auburn will have at least come into this game with only one, maybe, hopefully one loss to still give them a chance to possibly make some noise down the stretch. They definitely have the roster to do so. With some things going their way, really could make it happen. But Auburn plays Ole Miss and then has a very unprecedented bye week in between Ole Miss and Georgia. So that gives them time to prepare for the Georgia game. But like I said, Ole Miss, I just don't think this will be a game that, will be that consequential for Auburn. I think Auburn wins this game by 2 scores. Once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart here for the podcast, talking a little bit about Auburn football, previewing the Ole Miss Rebels and what they have coming up. I think this team is definitely on the rebuilding, really trying to rebuild this program to be able to be competitive in the SEC. As always, it's always great to be an Auburn Tiger. Go ahead and comment on this video, like the video, and subscribe to Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. War Eagle.